Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are wading into some really profound and, frankly, very heavy source material. I think it might be some of the most intense we've ever looked at.
That's definitely up there.
Yeah. This isn't a deep dive into, historical data or charts. This is a journey into an internal map, a map of despair.
That's a good way to put it.
The sources we have today are intensely philosophical. They're deeply personal, and they deal with this very specific, very powerful kind of disillusionment and exhaustion.
Right.
So our mission today isn't just to talk about feeling sad or feeling tired. It's to meticulously unpack the specific emotional, the intellectual, and even the spiritual crisis that's laid out by the person who wrote these notes.
Exactly. We're looking at the architecture of a devastating realization. That's really the core of it.
The architecture of a realization. I like that.
Because what we're analyzing here is the immense internal cost that happens when you pair two things. A really deep curiosity, that drive to know and understand, with an equally deep sense of compassion. The sources articulate this very specific pain point. What happens when your desire to help and your ability to help just completely diverge? So we need to pay very close attention to the precise language they use.
Because they're defining something unique.
They're defining a unique experience of devastation. It's not a general feeling, it's specific.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack this. I think we have to start with the foundational identity that's presented in the notes. This is so crucial because the breakdown that follows is directly linked to who this person believes they are.
Right, the self-concept.
Exactly. The sources are crystal clear. This individual sees themselves as three things all at once.
Well,
first, they are, and I'm quoting here, deeply curious and tries to figure out things.
the investigator.
The investigator. Second, they are a compassionate person who feels deeply.
The empath.
And third, and this is maybe the most critical piece of the puzzle, they are a problem solver who loves to fix things.
The engineer, the fixer. So you have the investigator, the empath, and the engineer all in one person.
And you can see immediately how this sets up a catastrophic point of failure, right?
Absolutely. It's a perfect storm.
This person is literally wired to observe the world, to understand how it works, feel its pain, and then jump in to repair it. That's their whole operating system.
But then, reality shits.
Then we hit the central conflict.
Yeah.
The sources state they are, quote, crushed by the magnitude of the issues and suffering in this world.
And that word magnitude, it's doing a tremendous amount of work in that sentence.
It really is.
This isn't about being unable to solve one small, contained problem. It's the cumulative, the ceaseless, the global weight of it all at once.
And here's where that problem solver identity it shatters. They say they feel mostly helpless to resolve this suffering.
And that's the key, isn't it? The feeling of helplessness. It's a direct assault on their identity. The one tool they are best at fixing things, it becomes completely obsolete.
It's like a master carpenter showing up to fix an earthquake. The tools are useless against the sheer scale of the problem.
That's a great analogy. And if we look at this through that lens of identity, that failure of action is profoundly destabilizing.
Because if you're defined by your ability to solve, and then you encounter a world that is fundamentally unsolvable by your efforts, well, what are you then?
What are you then? And what's fascinating here is that the initial pain isn't just sadness about the suffering itself. It's the internal conflict. It's the agony caused by the failure of their own skill set.
So their own greatest strengths become the source of their pain.
Precisely. The very tools they rely on, logic, curiosity, compassion, they only lead to greater pain. Because the deeper they look, which is their curiosity.
The more suffering they see.
Yeah.
That's the compassion.
And the less fixable it all appears. That's the logic. It's a feedback loop of despair.
Wow.
And this raises a really important question for you, for the person listening. What happens to a person when their fundamental drive to understand only brings them unbearable knowledge, and their drive to fix is just rendered useless?
That's a heavy question. Because that awareness, that deep insight into the scale and complexity, it becomes the crushing element itself. But the source material doesn't stop there. It gets worse.
It gets much worse.
Here's where the narrative takes this dramatic and I think genuinely chilling turn. It moves beyond just a passive exhaustion from observing a complex, broken world.
Yes, this is a critical pivot.
This individual describes a turning point where their curiosity, their need to know, led them to peek behind the curtain.
I remember reading that line. It sent a shiver down my spine.
It's powerful. because they move from seeing the world as broken or chaotic or maybe just tragically complex to realizing something far more specific and devastating about the cause of all that brokenness.
And this is the definitive moment in these sources.
Right.
The realization they claim to have is that the suffering and the issues they're witnessing are not the result of accident. They're not from natural disaster or just simple human incompetence.
No.
The source explicitly claims the devastating realization is that, quote, this is all intentional. Intentional.
Yeah.
And we have to stop and analyze the colossal philosophical weight of believing that. Of believing suffering is by design.
It changes everything.
It changes everything. This is why the source calls it the final, ultimate, existential spiritual blow.
Let's break that down. Why is it the final blow?
Well, think about the shift in worldview. If the world's problems are, say, accidental like hurricanes or statistical chaos or just, unintended consequences, you have a reality that's difficult, sure, but it's essentially neutral.
Right. It's not personal.
It's not personal, and you can dedicate your life to minimizing that chaos. You can build better systems, better warning signs. There is still hope for eventual improvement through effort. You can still be a problem solver.
But once you introduce the concept of intentionality,
everything changes. The problem is no longer complexity. The problem is design. The pain shifts from accepting an unfortunate, chaotic reality to dealing with profound, fundamental malice.
Malice or betrayal or cosmic injustice.
Yes. If it's intentional, it implies a systematic rigging of the game. That belief, it just fundamentally ruptures every system of belief you might hold.
Like what?
Well, faith in progress, for one. Faith in inherent human goodness. The faith that the universe is, at the very least, benignly indifferent. All of that is gone.
So the source material here is incredibly clear that the curiosity that was supposed to bring enlightenment, to bring understanding,
instead, it brought evidence of, in their view, a malevolent design.
It destroys the foundational hope that a problem solver absolutely requires to function.
It's the ultimate intellectual dead end. There's nowhere to go from there. Your primary function has been rendered not just useless, but a cruel joke.
And that collapse, that dead end, it leads directly into the emotional state that's detailed in the second source we have.
Yes, the aftermath.
The source takes great pains to differentiate this state from, common fatigue or just ordinary sadness, and makes it really clear this is a specific type of devastation.
And we have to look closely at that differentiation they make. Let's start with their tiredness. Okay? It's not simply physical burnout. It's not mental burnout. It's not the kind of tired where you just, need a nap or a week off.
No, this is something deeper.
It's a profound systemic fatigue. It is described as, quote, the I am exhausted of witnessing, enduring, and even causing meaningless, repetitive, unavoidable pain, kind of tired.
I want to pause on that for a second. The inclusion of causing pain. Why do you think that's so essential to their exhaustion? That's a really interesting addition.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It suggests a tragic and unwilling complicity.
Complicity in what?
In the system itself. If you believe the system is intentionally rigged for pain, you start to realize that your own attempts to just live a normal life, buying things, participating in the economy, just surviving, may inadvertently perpetuate that very system.
So even just existing becomes a moral compromise.
A crushing one. It adds this layer of guilt to the exhaustion. It's not just the failure of your actions to fix things. It's the realization that even your necessary actions or your inaction are a source of subtle, unavoidable pain for someone, somewhere.
That's exhausting just to think about.
It's an exhaustion of the spirit. It comes from bearing witness to a perpetual cyclical failure that you are also, in some small way, a part of.
And then from that specific tiredness, we get to the core definition of their sadness, which, as you said, they don't call sadness. They label it devastation.
Devastation, a much stronger word.
And this is where they itemize the specific losses that define the depth of this crisis. It's not sadness over a single event. It's sadness over the loss of foundational beliefs.
Precisely. The feeling is defined by 3 specific losses. 3 pillars that were just annihilated by that realization of intentionality.
Okay, what are they?
First, the loss of faith in humanity. Second, the loss of hope in the future. And third, the loss of belief in the ultimate goodness of the universe.
Each one of those is massive on its own.
They're monumental. And to understand the weight, let's just think about what each loss means in a practical day-to-day sense.
Go ahead.
Loss of faith in humanity. It means you can no longer assume goodwill or basic competence from strangers, from institutions, from leaders. Every action you see becomes suspect. The default is no longer trust, it's suspicion.
Okay. And the second one, loss of hope in the future.
That means the problem solver has nothing left to build toward. There's no positive endpoint. There's no better tomorrow to work for. There's only the repetition of the present suffering. It removes all motivation.
And the last one, loss of belief in the ultimate goodness of the universe.
That one might be the biggest. It eliminates any sense of cosmic meaning, any safety net, the idea that things will work out in the end or that there's some kind of justice that's gone. It's the belief that you are truly fundamentally alone in a hostile system.
So it's the entire framework of personal meaning dismantled, piece by piece by piece.
Completely dismantled.
When you remove that belief in eventual goodness or fairness, the very foundation of the person who wants to figure out things and fix things, it just collapses. There's nothing left to stand on.
It is the complete collapse of their internal operating system. This isn't just melancholy. This isn't a bad mood. This is a philosophical and spiritual void.
A void created by what?
A void created when the intellect, the curious part of them, confirms their absolute worst suspicion. That the struggle isn't accidental, it's deliberate. The problem isn't just external anymore. The problem has successfully dismantled the internal resources needed to cope with it.
And that right there is the definition of the deep, differentiated existential devastation that's outlined in this source material.
Exactly. That's the endpoint of their journey.
So to bring this deep dive together, what we've really analyzed is a painful intellectual and emotional journey, a trajectory.
A very clear one.
It started with a powerful, compassionate curiosity, that drive to know. And that drive is what led the individual to, quote, peek behind the curtain.
Which led them to the crushing perception or belief that global suffering is intentional. It's by design.
And that ultimate realization, that belief in malicious design, it culminates in this specific, profound exhaustion.
An exhaustion defined by two things happening at once. The total failure of their problem solver identity and the simultaneous specific collapse of all foundational hope, faith, and belief in any kind of universal goodness.
It's the cost of absolute, unfiltered witnessing.
That's it, the cost of seeing too much and feeling too deeply without the power to change it.
Wow. It leaves us with a really provocative thought to mull over long after this deep dive concludes.
What's that?
If the greatest pain, as described here, comes from the realization that suffering is intentional, what resource, internal or external, would even be necessary to rebuild hope in a world that you perceive as being fundamentally rigged?
That's a huge question. Where would you even start?
Right. And maybe more critically, for the deeply curious person, for the person who feels that drive to know, how do you maintain that essential intellectual curiosity, that need to find the truth, without risking this exact kind of spiritual and existential exhaustion?
How do you look behind the curtain and still find a way to live in the world?
Exactly. How do you keep learning without it destroying you?
You ever just look at the world and feel completely overwhelmed? Like a kind of despair that's so deep you can't even find the words for it? Well, today we're going to unpack that exact feeling. We're going to look at where it comes from and the huge impact it has on us. And it really all boils down to this one simple but really powerful question. You know, we're always told that knowledge is power, that it's a good thing, but what if it's not? What happens when the more you find out about how things really work, the more painful it gets? And this right here, this is the raw emotion we're talking about. It's so much more than just being sad. It's that feeling of being absolutely crushed, just completely overwhelmed by the sheer size of the world's problems and all the suffering that comes with them. Okay, so who is it that feels this the most? You know, the most intensely? Well, the answer seems to be tied to a certain mindset, a way of thinking that kind of opens the door to this kind of despair. And the crazy part is, it all starts with some of our best qualities as people. Think about the kind of person who gets hit by this. They're usually super curious, always wanting to know why. They're also deeply compassionate. I mean, they feel things on a whole other level. And they're problem solvers. They see something broken and their first instinct is, how can I fix this? I mean, those all sound like great traits to have, right? Well, that's where the paradox kicks in. Because those exact same traits, being curious, being compassionate, wanting to fix things, they end up leading you to this place where you feel totally crushed, totally helpless. It's like your greatest strengths literally become the source of your deepest pain. And this is what leads to the turning point. There's this moment where that curiosity, that need to understand, it leads you to discover something that just changes everything. This is the moment when just knowing things becomes this incredibly heavy weight to carry.
It's that feeling of pulling back a curtain, right? You're expecting to find some simple, maybe messy, but understandable reason for why things are the way they are. But instead, what you find is something much, much darker.
And here it is, the knockout punch. The realization that all the suffering, the chaos, the systems that just don't work, it's not an accident. It's not just bad luck. It starts to feel intentional, like it's a feature, not a bug. It feels like it was all designed this way.
Now, a realization like that's not just another depressing piece of information. It's what you'd call an existential blow, a spiritual blow. It's a shock to the system that attacks the very foundation of how you see the world, your sense of purpose, your belief in how things are supposed to work.
So, what does that actually feel like to get hit with a blow like that? Well, it puts you in a state that's way beyond just sad or just tired. It's a kind of exhaustion that's bone deep, soul deep. And I'm not talking about the, man, I need a nap kind of tired. No, this is the exhaustion you get from constantly having to witness so much pain that feels pointless, that just keeps happening over and over, and that feels like there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's the exact same thing when we talk about the sadness. This isn't I lost my favorite pen sad. This is devastation. It's the kind of devastation you feel when you lose something huge, something foundational, like your entire faith.
And all of this leads to the final stage in this whole downward spiral, a full-blown crisis of faith. It's like this great unraveling, where all the core beliefs that held your world together just start to fall apart, one after the other.
First to go, your faith in humanity. That belief that deep down people are good and that they'll eventually do the right thing. Yeah, that starts to just fade away. And after that, hope for the future. You know, that optimism that tells you, hey, things will get better, we're always moving forward. That light just goes out. And then the last, and maybe the biggest one of all, goes any belief in the ultimate goodness of the universe. The idea that there's some kind of cosmic justice or inherent order to things. Gone. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling of total devastation. It's a complete wipeout of all the foundational beliefs that make life feel meaningful, the ones that help you endure suffering.
So after going through this whole journey, from being this compassionate, curious person to being totally disillusioned, what do you even call this feeling? Is there a name for this very specific kind of pain?
Look, this is more than just being sad. It's more than being a pessimist. It's a very specific type of existential despair, and it's born directly from being a compassionate person who is aware of the world and sees that its problems seem intentional. In a way, your own empathy becomes the engine that drives your existential crisis. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When the very act of caring, of being aware and having empathy becomes a burden that feels too heavy to carry, what's left? What do you possibly hold on to then?